ready to.
I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's May 18th, 2023. It's 7 p.m. We're in the Aldermanic Chamber. We'll start the meeting by taking a roll call.
Alderman Richard A. Dowd, Chairman.
Present.
Alderman at Large Michael B. O'Brien. Alderman at Large Lori Wilshire.
I'm here.
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
I'm here.
Alderman June M. Karen.
Here.
Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
And Alderman John Sullivan.
Here.
Alderman Tebow is also here. And also in attendance, we have Tim Cummings, Administrative Services Director and COO. Amy DeRoche, Economic Development Project Manager. Jill Stansfield, Parking Manager. Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. And Jennifer McCormick, Library Director.
Okay, we have a quorum. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone that'd like to speak in public comment? Seeing no one, move on. Communications,
There is none.
unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions,
There is none.
new business ordinances,
There is none.
tabled in committee. Oh, you can't make that motion. I'll make the motion. Like to make a motion to remove from the table R-23-125. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We will now be discussing the budget. So R-23-125, by the way, is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2024 proposed budget for the City of Nashua General Enterprise Social Revenue and Grant Funds, Special Revenue and Grant Funds. So this evening, we're going to be talking about general government and the public library. So the first item is going to be the Hunt Building. Director Cummings, are you going to come up and lead us off, or?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, what I would suggest is myself and the Economic Development Director come up, maybe sit with you, and if a technical question arises, we can have one of the department heads or the employees of the various departments that are with us this evening answer a question if you'd so
fine.
like. Oh, okay. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Administrative Services Director for the city, and with me is the new Economic Development Director, Liz Hannum. And I'm here this evening to go over the proposal, the budget proposal submitted to you by the mayor for a couple various budgets. This evening, I believe tonight, we're going to start speaking on the Hunt Building, which is a relatively straightforward budget in regards to its carried forward the same level of services from last year to this year. And it is under guideline and well under the 4% budget that was submitted to you. You should note, though, this particular budget has two different sources of funding. One is the Special Revenue Fund, and then only salary comes from the general fund. So it's a little different than some of the other budgets that you've seen this in traditional framework that we have here with our other department budgets, if you will, but not uncommon. This is what we've done over the well, since I've been here, at least in terms of how we handle and finance the Hunt Memorial Building. I would say the particular issue we should really speak about or address is actually a capital improvement request. That is the major driver, I would say, of our focus in FY24. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want me to talk about the capital request and the capital need for this particular building now, or if you want me to wait and take comments on the more traditional operational budget for the Hunt Building.
I think we can bring it up, but the Hunt Building, the revenues are on 42 and appropriations on 43. I think that, don't the revenues from the rent go into the special revenue fund and then, so.
Correct.
Want to address how that works?
That's right, Mr. Chairman. So essentially, there's a transfer that happens, but the money gets collected from events and special projects. And for instance, a great event that just occurred last weekend where Amy DeRoche, who's here with us this evening, put on a high tea in celebration of Mother's Day, had just under 100 patrons through the building, great type of marketing and advertising for the building. But in addition to that, sold out 2 different seatings for the building, and they turned, I think, something like a $7,000 profit or thereabouts on the event, which that money would go into this special revenue fund, which would be used to help with expenditures and expenses related to this building. During COVID-19, it goes without saying, we saw quite a drop-off in events happening at the building, but through Amy's hard work, she's pretty much recovered from the drop-off in bookings, and I'm pleased to report that the building is now booked regularly. I know Amy has said to me in passing, I don't have a free weekend until the fall. So I think that's a great testament to how beloved the building is to this community.
So relative to the Hunt Building, the appropriations are pretty much the same as last year. The capital is not in the appropriations in the capital reserve. And you can touch on that after we go through, if anybody has any questions on the appropriations. Does anyone have any questions on the appropriations for the Hunt Building?
I just had, sorry.
I had a
Alderman
question
Jettie?
about the revenue.
Revenues?
Yeah, if I
Okay.
could. So I noticed that, I suppose it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but you've got event fees, year-to-date 0, and you're budgeting 6,000. And then, but facility rental fees, you've got year-to-date 15,000, and you're budgeting 8,000. I mean, the total between the two is still 14,000. Is that, why are you lowballing, for lack of a better word, the event fees as opposed to, and I mean, highballing the event fees and lowballing the facility rental fees?
If I may, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Dr. Cummings?
You know, great question. I mean, it's really how we code the various fees. You know, essentially at the end of the day, the thing that that I would want you to hit home on is the fact that we're exceeding the revenues as projected, and that's really the important thing. I mean, yes, maybe we could code it a little differently that shows, you know, the particular events happening a certain way. Honestly, I can't tell you the difference between an event fee and a facilities rental fee, but ultimately, what I know is we used to generate somewhere prior to COVID-19, you know, around $25,000-ish, and we're not back yet to what we were doing pre-COVID, but we're slowly getting there. And as I reported, I know some of the events, bookings are up finally, and so I think what you're going to see over the next couple fiscal years is, you know, that revenue, which we keep budget conservatively because we want a surplus in this, slowly start to tick up.
Follow-up?
Thank
or-
you.
All set?
Yep, thank you.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I don't have any questions on the appropriation side, just on the revenue side. Maybe some clarification on, it says increase, decrease in fund balance. That $18,000, is that money coming out of the expendable trust fund to the building as revenue?
The 18,000,
Yes.
yes, I believe that is correct. That it would be the money that would be coming out of the fund and into expenses for the building.
Got it. Follow up, please.
Yes, follow up, Alderman Sullivan?
How much does it cost to rent this building for an event?
That would be an Amy DeRoche question. And as Amy approaches the lectern, I want to just suggest that I believe the facility rental fees is the lease payments for office building, for our office tenants, and the event fees is the one-off events that occur. But I believe Mr. Roach could correct me if I'm wrong in that.
Yes,
So Amy DeRoche, I'm the Economic Development Planning Manager for the record. So to clarify, the event fees, our Mother's Day High Tea was our first event that we've had since COVID. So when we get our checks from Eventbrite, we will put that into event seat fees. So you'll see $6,000 go into that line. But that's why there's nothing in there right now. When we do our murder mystery in the fall, the ticket revenue from that will go into event fees. It's just how we differentiate. So the rental, what's the line? So the facility rental fees are when people rent the building. So a rental is $450 to rent the building. We increased our rates this year.
Yeah.
It was $350 previously, yes. And there's usually building lease fees, it says building
Next
rental
one down.
income
Yep.
that's the office space that we rent.
Okay, so $450 per event.
$450 per, yes, rental.
Okay,
Mhm.
great, thanks.
question, Alderman Kelly?
Yeah, well, we have Mr. Roche here. I actually just wanted to know from the, rental income, I know there's a number of suites in there, are they all fully rented, or are you?
I
what are you
have-
From a capacity standpoint,
So Amy DeRoche, we have 3 out of 4 rented at this point in time.
thank you,
Is that Alderwoman Kelly?
that's it.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, Alderman O'Brien joined us at 7:10 PM, straight from Concord, solving the world's problems.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Chairman, if I may, while Amy DeRoche was at the lectern before she sits down, I was hoping maybe she could give the overview.
Too late.
I'd be happy to give the overview of the capital request, but I know she's worked really hard on it over the last 6 or so months, and so I think you'd be pleased to hear about her work on this project.
Yes, go ahead.
So Amy DeRoche, as some people are aware, my tower windows are very much in need of repair and replacement. Not necessarily the glass, but the actual wooden casings that hold the windows in place. They're 120 years old and they have given their all, as it were. I've worked very closely with Pamela Davies, and we have put out grants like Mad Women. We were recently funded by the National Parks Save America's Treasures. We got $485,000, which was a wonderful, wonderful Christmas surprise for us. But that only gets us about halfway. So the capital request that will be coming through, I think we're putting through for 1.2 million for the windows. I've worked with the architect. Luckily, the firm that built the building originally still exists. So it's nice to be able to have them as a partner in this and get kind of accurate numbers for what to expect for cost.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you, just to clarify, is 1.2 the total cost to repair them, or is that what you're asking for on top of the 485?
That's the
Total
total,
project cost.
total product cost. Yep.
So the delta, okay.
Yes, Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a different look for me here. It's actually Alderman Derek Tebow, not Alderman Clemmons. My question is, okay, so I know about the windows or the casings. What else is needed in the building? And I know we're not gonna jump on that this year, but is there other stuff that's needed right now?
That is the major need at this point in time.
Okay.
But yes, there are
But-
definitely deferred capital maintenance needs
Yes.
for that building. I believe, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
could Mr. Roach maybe tell the body here how much you've spent this year on just trying to preserve the building that were emergency repairs?
We've put $6,000 into the elevator. We put $90,000 into a new boiler. That was a surprise. We just had to fix the circulation pump, which was another $3,000. I have a backflow that is being repaired. That's another $1,400. It's all just normal capital maintenance stuff that is coming to a head right now. So,
Thank you, and the reason why I wanted to point that out is because I think it illustrates the point of, when we have some of these older buildings, some of these aged infrastructure are coming due, and some of these requests were funded through the special revenue fund, which is one of the reasons why it's drawn down a little bit, but some of these requests just far exceeded the means readily available through this, technical operating budget, so we had to turn to the building trust fund here in the city and other places to fund some of these expenditures. And as I noted, a lot of this was emergency in nature that were not necessarily known to us, like this Windows project, which we can obviously plan on. So I just thought that would be a good detail for this body to know.
Are those repairs managed by the city building group?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Tim Cummings for the record. It really depends on the specific project per se. I know our hunt administrator actively likes to manage a lot of her building projects. So it's definitely in combination with Jay Honeywell's team. And absolutely they are part of the process, and they often take the lead on some items that might be more mechanical. And then things that might be more specific to the building, like the elevator, then that would be Mr. Roach.
Okay, Alderwoman Kelly?
Having just come on the heels of the Energy and Environment Committee, I'm wondering what the energy efficiency of 100 and some odd building is like. What do your heating bills look like?
expensive. I think we budget, I'm not sure.
You can get back to me.
Yeah, I can get back to you with the numbers. It's expensive, and the one interesting conversation is that with the new materials that exist, it'll make the windows a lot more energy efficient and still be historically correct.
The heating in the 6,000.
That sounds about right, yeah. I was gonna say 6,000. I believe that's what we budget, and we get pretty close to that every year.
Not a lot you can do relative to making that building energy efficient. It's pretty old.
And
Something to think about if we're doing upgrades.
And the big thing, Mr. Chairman, is with doing this capital project, I'll be pleased to report that it won't rain in the building any longer, as right now there's serious water intrusion that occurs, which water getting inside the building can cause a lot of issues that is of concern. So that's one of the big reasons why we want to get ahead of it.
Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we get donations ever for the Hunt building? Is that anything large, any large donations, or just?
So, for the record, Amy DeRoche, we have in the past, we've had some people pass away and leave us a bit of money, but the bulk of the fundraising are the events that I put on at the building.
There is an expendable trust for the Hunt building that people can donate into. It was established so people could do that. Alderman Jettie?
Thank you. So I kind of recall your window project going before the Capital Improvement Committee. What kind of a rating did you get from them?
I would have to double check. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have that book with me
I don't have
either.
that book with me.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to request that, anybody that comes before the Budget Committee with a capital request that they, and I'm not faulting anyone here tonight, but it would be good for us to know what the Capital Improvement Committee did with this.
Well, in the back
I
of
hate
the
to think
book,
that the Capital Improvement Committee is spending time analyzing these projects and then, not being, and not being considered when when it comes before the budget committee. I think we ought to be working together.
It's a good source of information, but it goes to the mayor, and the mayor selects which ones he wants to fund, and that's in the back of your book. There's a listing of the ones that he's recommended in his budget. If it's not on that list, it's not part of this budget process. Unless we had it. All set?
Okay, just to clarify, are you saying that the capital improvement committee is just an advisory committee to the mayor? And then it's up to the mayor to pick what he wants to do?
That's the way it works right now.
Okay,
And I've been talking to Director Sullivan about changing that, but that's the way it is right now.
okay. Thank you for that clarification. And I do have another question. I think I know the answer to this, if through you to Ms. DeRoche, if I could. So, you know, this is an iconic building. And, you know, a lot of us, maybe fewer and fewer of us, you know, used it when it was a library. And it's kind of the, you know, oftentimes when you see photos of Nashua, it includes the Hunt Building. You know, it's like I said, it's iconic. And so I'm envisioning or imagining that, you know, people choose it to have weddings, right? And I'm assuming, you know, this is, I think I know the answer, but this is for the public who would be asking, you know, can you assure us that you're doing the best you can to market that thing as much as you can to get as much revenue as possible? I'm assuming that that's the case. Is that, do you want to talk about that? Or?
Yeah, Amy DeRoche for the record. One thing that I think of as marketing is actually doing something like a high tea, like we did this past weekend. We had 100 people come through, and it's not just, oh, have some tea and have a great time. It's, did you know you can rent this building for your event? Because here's a brochure, and happy to talk to you about your future plans. And our CFO's daughter is getting married next weekend in my building. So it's, we're up to our eyeballs in wedding season right now, and we get a lot of word of mouth. A lot of people going, oh, so-and-so had their baby shower here, and now I want to have my birthday party. You know, that kind of thing. We have a big Facebook presence, mailing list, that type of thing.
Good, thank you.
All set?
Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Rocha, I know on Clinton Street, parking could be at a premium. And I would imagine that has some possible negative impact on your rental of the property. You know, people may find some difficulty, or is that just me thinking it? And then number two, if it is somewhat of a problem, is there something we can do by ordinance to try to say during special events that people did rent the Hunt community, that we could probably open up Clinton Street a bit or something like that to enhance you in renting the building?
Hi, Amy DeRoche. I appreciate any help I can get. I can tell you in 8 years, I have never had a single rental go, oh my God, parking was terrible. The one nice thing, like this weekend, the wedding that's coming through, they've worked with Jill Stansfield in the parking department. They have going to be bagging some meters so that they make sure on Clinton Street they have enough space. Larger events, we even work with First Church next door, and they'll make a phone call and say, hey, do you mind if we use your parking lot? And that's never been a problem either.
Okay. Just a brief follow-up. Yeah, just more like a statement at this point. I didn't know we bagged the meters, and that's very positive. So that's a good approach. Thank you.
Director Cummings?
Yeah, thank you. So just a couple clarifiers here. I believe we bag the meters, but we probably do it for a fee.
We do it for free.
So I just want to be clear of that. I don't want anyone to be thinking that, you know, you rent the Hunt building, you're getting parking on Clinton Street. But then secondly, I just also want to further my comments relative to this capital request, because I don't want there to be any confusion. project itself that we were just talking about may not be in your capital improvement request for this operational budget, but it actually may be in the escrows that come up in the fall. And so it's a project that will be coming about, and so I'm gonna clarify that specifically, but I'm having a feeling right now, I got a little ahead of myself, and I think it's actually gonna appear in an escrow because it's a capital project. And so I just wanted to set that correctly for the record as well.
So capitals can be funded through the budget, they can be by escrow, or they can be by bond. So, by the way, I was one of the people that used the Hunt Building as a library, and every time I think of that time, I think of Harry Potter.
I have had an epic Harry Potter baby shower in the building, I have to say, so.
Alderman Wilshire?
I also remember it as a library, going there as a child to the basement, to the kids' library section, yeah. And also have rented it for wedding reception. It's a beautiful place for an event like that. So thank you for all the hard work you put in. That building is really a gem. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
Yes.
So do you want me to?
You also used it as a
Oh,
library, Alderman Karen?
Actually, I worked there for a summer as a library in the children's room in the basement. So we also used it for the celebration of 2000 when we had the downtown fireworks and New Year's Eve, and we hung up the quilt, the volunteer quilt, and I don't know if you remember Don Markey, that worked at the high school, history teacher. Him and his wife and I hung that quilt in the window, and she almost went out the window. So it was quite an experience. Talk about Harry Potter. So yes, it's a beautiful facility, and as we talked about before, Alderman O'Brien and I, we don't have a maintenance schedule for our facilities, and once we build them, we forget about them until something really catastrophic happens. So we really need to think about that moving forward with all these buildings that we're putting up, the new schools and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you. Although I'm still the youngest.
Any other questions on the Hunt Building before we move on? Seeing none, all right, we'll go to parking enforcement.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, you may want to skip over parking and do economic development next. I only say that because I believe economic development will be a relatively straightforward budget as opposed to parking, where we might have a little bit more detailed of a conversation. But whatever the pleasure of the chair is.
That's okay with me, we can go to economic development.
And the only reason why I wanted to...
Page 49, by the way.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, Tim Cummings for the record, and I have Liz Hannum with me. And the parking, I'm sorry, the economic development budget is really straightforward in terms of level services. It is completely staffed right now. It has no vacancies. There have been no changes from the proposed to what the mayor presented. And it is really came under the guideline, and it's absolutely underneath the 4% proposed in the budget. It is pretty straightforward in terms of keeping the office level funded pretty much. The major driver costs are fixed obligation costs, such as either contracts or salary, wages, and benefits. In prior years, actually, I had rolled the operational escrows that had been reoccurring into this budget here. I did that in previous fiscal years. We have used those monies as originally anticipated. Those are for various contracted services that have funded various real estate study needs or various contracted services as they've come about. Mohawk Tannery being a good example of that. Didn't necessarily know by name that was going to be something that was going to rise to the top of the surface in terms of needing study, but obviously as we've started to get more into the redevelopment of that project, we've had to have some technical services or real estate studying done, and so we've utilized this contracted services line item. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave my comments there.
Questions on economic development? Yes.
You know my question.
Alderman Karen.
Yes, thank you. your department proposal is exactly as what the mayor has proposed? Or was there some cuts made, and if so, where?
Subject to me double checking, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I believe it's as exactly proposed.
Okay, okay,
Any questions?
thank you.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so in the economic development department there, I see two people, two full-time employees listed. On the page 245, there's a list of personnel, and
Page 245?
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Yep. It needs to be updated, but yep.
okay, and so there's the economic development director and the coordinator. Is that Mr. Roche? Is she? the-
Correct.
Oh, okay. But it lists 182,000, and on page 50, it's 146,000. Does
I'm
that
sorry.
182 include the fringe benefits?
The
Is that what I'm
salaries in the
missing?
back where those names aren't correct. In all cases. Not in all cases, but in some cases. I checked it out today. I have to talk to Mr. Griffin about it. They're not what's reflected sometimes in the department's appropriations, and what's in the appropriations is the right number.
Okay.
Well, I just want to thank the chairman for having that answer, because I didn't know that.
That's why he's the chair.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can get those pages fixed, but yes. Are you all set?
No, I had one more question.
Okay.
So, I remember, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but there was somebody working with you when you were, when I first became an alderman and you were the economic development director. And he left, and I thought that he was not replaced, but has he been replaced by Mr. Roche, or?
If I may,
Yes,
Mr.
Director
So
Cummings.
what you're talking about happened a year or two ago, so it's a little bit, didn't happen in FY '23. I think it happened in FY '22, or maybe FY '21, but I think it was FY '22, which was, yes, we eliminated the essentially one FTE in the economic development office. And then what happened was we backfilled Amy DeRoche into the economic development project manager position. The book doesn't read accurately, it's not an economic development coordinator position. But nonetheless, that meant that the Hunt building administrator position, which was an additional FTE, was never filled, and still, technically, that money's was deducted from this office's, that salaries money was deducted from this office's line item, and it has not been replaced.
Okay, can I follow up?
Follow up?
So, I guess we'll, next year, we'll get a better answer from our new economic development director. But yeah, you were the economic development director, and now you've got all that experience. Do you feel that it's sufficiently staffed to do the work that we're expecting from it?
Director Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's a great question. I think it goes to, how robust of an economic development agenda this city wants to actually execute on. Is it enough? What I can say is it can be enough if you're willing to use contracted services to provide the agenda that you want, and you don't put it all on the onus of the staff and think that you can do everything quote unquote in-house. I say that to you because you don't necessarily, in economic development, necessarily need to add personnel bodies to be able to still accomplish your mission and your agenda. Here in Nashua, we take a little bit of a longer-term view of economic development. It's more improving quality of life through infrastructure investments. The Riverwalk is a great example. That is a 4-year-long project, and it has been decades in the making, but we know that once it's done, it will increase the value and throughout the downtown area and improve quality of life for not just the workers in the area, but the residents as well. And so you can accomplish a lot of that through contracted services. You don't necessarily need to have an additional in-house staff. Now, with all that being said, I do think the city of Nashua as a whole, if you were to look at other municipalities, does not spend as much in economic development as what you'd consider your quote-unquote peer communities. And that's just a fact. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I think it's working here in Nashua. But if you were to be comparing yourselves to comparable communities, economic and socio and population and whatever metrics you would want to use, without question, we don't fund our economic development as richly as other communities.
Okay, thank you.
All set? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment for Alderman Jettie. I figured it out. All of the wages for those two positions are in economic development in the supplemental information in the back of the book. However, half of the wage for the economic development coordinator sits in the Hunt Building salaries and wages at $36,297. So if you take $182,533, which is the roll-up of those two positions, you back out $36,297, you come up with $146,256, which is, I was $1 off. You do come up with that. So that's the reason. That's where the money is.
Okay, thank you.
That's good, because I was originally thinking was the benefits added into the salary, the full cost of that person. But anyway, so we'll look at that. Any other questions? I said two quick ones. What is the right-of-way fees?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, so there's right-of-way fees that have been carried in this budget, and they were escrowed at one point in time, and is probably a conversation at some point to talk about maybe reducing the right-of-way fees, but any private railroad crossing that happens in the city needs to be paid for, that when the public traverses it, and and this is a legacy item that's been in our budget over the years. It's my understanding it's always just been put in economic development, and so therefore it's housed there just in case we get asked by what was Pan Am, and they were known from time to time to ask us for some monies for private crossings in the city, and so it was decided a long time ago to handle it this way.
Okay, I just asked that's for the public's benefit, and the other one for the public's benefit is other contracted services. What are other contracted services?
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
50.
Page
That's on
50.
Page 50, and then, we don't have line items there, but it's under the 55 other services.
Okay, yep, and so that is the line item in particular that I referenced that we used, that houses a lot of the real estate consulting studies that are done, market studies, and/or a lot of it is appraisals. So I can tell you that just recently we had to comply with New Hampshire DOT request, do a $10,000 appraisal on the right-of-way that abuts the quote-unquote Mohawk Tannery land, and so it's this line item that would pay for that type of service.
Okay, good info. Any other questions? All right, now we'll move on. You wanna go back to parking, or you wanna go to the TIF?
No, but parking, I think, would probably make the most sense now, Mr. Chairman, and I think that Jill Stansfield is with us, and I appreciate her being here this evening. Parking has changed a little bit from this year, for what is being proposed to change a little bit from this current year to next year, but not maybe as drastically as some folks may think. And so what I wanted to start the conversation out by saying is, for the most part, we're trying to stay consistent this operational year with our services. And so what I anticipate to happen in FY '24 is a more robust conversation as we look to implement the parking study that we just completed. And so we have Desmond engaged to implement and help us develop a financial plan or a business plan over this summer period. And as we go into the fall, I would anticipate us coming before you to really have a conversation about implementing the recommendations in the master plan. And that really will be moving parking into an enterprise fund. And to be able to do that, you need to ensure that the revenues match the expenditures. It was pointed out very rightly so during our conversation about parking, during that study. We need to really know what that revenues would be. And so, we're studying what that potentially could be and what the expenditures could be to provide the level of services. So, and I say that effort would occur through FY '24 with the goal of trying to actually implement it in FY '25. And I want to give you that context because this FY '24 budget pretty much mirrors what you see for level of services. There are a couple items that should be addressed. One, starting with parking enforcement expenditures. We are not fully staffed. We have a couple positions open that are parking enforcement specialists. We are constantly hiring for those positions. We need all the positions that are budgeted. But parking enforcement expenditures is carrying one additional administrative staff position. And it's not a new body or a new FTE to the city of Nashua. What it is we transferred or moved the position that was in the treasurer's office and more appropriately put it in the parking department office. And so I believe I said it was funded under parking enforcement, maybe funded under parking operations, but nonetheless, what I want to make sure folks know is there is a new body being carried in the parking operations department budget that would help with parking enforcement and management more than anything else. This was a position that was housed in the treasurer's office, but during the study and with the actually turnover of a personnel and based on Treasurer Griffin's request, he wanted to kind of move that over now before they hired a new person into that role. And it was split funded, so some monies were paid for by parking and some monies were paid for by the finance department, and we've now moved it over completely to parking itself and kind of separated the two positions. Otherwise, really no changes per se. Parking operations, non-enforcement, fully staffed, and need to maintain the staffing personnel as there is. And I would suggest that the parking manager who's with us this evening would tell me that we actually need more parking help than what we currently have, and she would really like to have more resources. But with that being said, there was a reduction. I want to make sure that folks know that there was a request by the department for some additional monies, and it's not here. It did not make it through in the mayoral's budget proposal to you, but that was really for deferred capital maintenance. It was, again, trying to follow some of the direction that was made by our consultants. We had a deferred capital maintenance study done by Thornton Tomasetti on our garages, and they really recommended that we start putting some deferred capital maintenance monies annually into our operating budget. You know, so originally there was a discussion about putting it in this year, but we recognize that we're gonna be looking to tackle a bigger project over the next year, so didn't necessarily need to do it right now, and because we do anticipate, you know, having that bigger bond authorization come before you and really tackle the problem, but then after, in the future year, adding that monies in so we can keep up with that deferred capital maintenance and not let it slip like we've had in years past. And then in addition to that, we do have a trust fund, and I want, you know, that is, has monies readily available to it if you ever needed to spend some money on the parking garages, so you didn't necessarily need to put it into this operating budget this year. So that was the rationale why it didn't make it into the mayor's budget before you, which the parking department completely agreed with. Otherwise, all the other real expenditures have stayed the same. We did add a little bit into snow removal. We heard loud and clear from some members of the Board of Aldermen that some more attention needed to be put onto the sidewalks. So we were able to stay within guideline and increase that line item, and we were happy to do so. So that's the only other real budget driver that's a change besides the obligations through contracts and fixed costs that are beyond our control.
Okay. Yeah, this is one of the areas where I didn't have any check marks at all on my pages. But I want to keep the questions to items that are directly related to the budget, not where cars are going to park or not park. Alderman Wiltshire is first.
Thank you. On page 245, you have under parking operations, the parking maintenance, parking manager, and superintendent of solid waste. Is that the position you were talking about that was moved from the treasurer's office?
I believe that would be a typo.
Okay.
And so we you know, as you all know, we're working through this new budgeting software. So I will double check that, but that is, I think maybe, again, a slight error.
That's kind of what I thought.
We'll have that checked. I think I had Alderwoman Kelly first.
Thank you. So my question is around page 46, outdoor dining permits. I thought that this was the year that we were going to start charging, and I don't see anything but zero.
Well, I'll start. I'm gonna look to where you are. I believe, again, you're talking about revenue that's collected?
Correct.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
When we were in the development of this budget, we really didn't know what that was gonna look like per se, so obviously being extremely conservative, didn't wanna put anything in. I can tell you though, we are charging, and it's $500 per space. We have participation. So I anticipate, you know, it's not gonna be a lot of money, but you're gonna see, you know, $10,000 to $20-ish thousand, maybe a little bit more, something like that range, probably in a future iteration.
Thank you.
All set. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I do know as Chairman of Infrastructure, Mr. Cummings, we've had this discussion before, and with Ms. Stansfield too. Due to the limited amount of employees that are under her, we're not really hitting completely all the area. So unfortunately, we have sort of like selective enforcement within the city. And let me clearly say to the public, the only reason why any community has a parking meter is to get the flush for businesses and stuff like that to keep the rotation going, okay? It is not really an integral part of our budget to make money off a parking meter, or else we would charge a lot more. But anyways, but the thing is, unfortunately right now with the current system, I am content to wait until this full program gets implemented and ready to come out of the barn. But right now it's not ready. There's a lot of moving parts to it. I'll say this to the citizens, just to be prepared, you know, but in about a year from now, I am hoping that we can look at Ms. Stansfield's request of additional personnel, because this parking is not gonna work. And if we talk about overnight parking, off-site, and I'm not talking Main Street, in neighborhoods, we're gonna need somebody to travel. And so therefore, that's gonna be covered by an employee, and that's gonna need to definitely be addressed. And it's part of our infrastructure that we need to have. And that's it. And the second thing too is, if I may.
Yes, continue.
The parking garages, unfortunately, we're great at building stuff, but we're very, very poor at maintaining them. And very pleased to find out what originally was thought as very concerning on the garages is still concerning, but it isn't, I don't want to use the term catastrophic, but there it goes, out my mouth. But the thing is, we are currently working, and this is what happens to any type of community when you want to play, you know, a little bit on the cheap and not take care of the existing structure. And if this went too much farther, I can just imagine, Mr. Cummings, what would be the cost of replacing the garage instead of repairing it?
Lots.
I'll do the math for you right now.
$80,000 of space?
Yeah, that's about right. So there's 400 parking spaces times $80,000. You know, you're looking at, you know, $50 to $75 million. As opposed to spending, you know, what I would say 10 to 15 million now, which will preserve the life of those structures.
Yeah, that's gonna be a whole other subject matter.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
all right. Alderman Kelly?
Thank you. I wanted to tack on to the deferred capital maintenance and deferring, putting it in there concerned me until you explained it a little bit, because I feel very strongly, like Alderman O'Brien has said, it's with our buildings, with streets, every time we cut that budget and then we have to take care of it in an emergency, we all know is not an efficient use of our taxpayer dollars. So I look forward to seeing that get some traction and some funding in the future. I did want to ask about the snow plowing services, because I was also one of the aldermen who's pretty vocal about this part of it. So I see you put about 5,000 in. Is that just for labor?
Contracted labor, yeah, contracted services.
And is that to keep it in the city, or would you be contracting it out?
Contracting it out.
What about equipment? Do you have enough equipment to be, I may have heard that maybe another sidewalk plow would be helpful, so I was just wondering.
Oh, you did?
I might have, yeah.
Oh, interesting. I can't speak to that right now. I don't know if another sidewalk plow per se would be more helpful. I think we just got another one that actually is on order, and we've been waiting for it to come in for quite some time now. I think it's gonna be due, I think we'll get it in before the next winter season, so I think we should, you know, see how we do with that additional piece of equipment before we look to bring something else. But in addition to that, because we contract services, we expect our contractors to have the equipment. And the plan at hand right now is to try to bring in the contracted services more quickly to do the parking lots. And that will allow our in-house group that have been doing our parking lots to go out immediately and focus on the sidewalks. And that way we're getting the sidewalks done in a much quicker time frame than previous. I'm sure if we had another additional piece of equipment, we could probably do it even quicker and maybe a little bit more. But I think we have a good plan in place for right now, and I know I could always come back to you if I see it not necessarily working out like we thought.
There'll be a much larger discussion on sidewalks when DPW comes in, so.
I look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along Alderwoman Kelly's idea there, or what the little birdie has whispered to you. I know with Park Rec, we took an old fire department line truck and repurposed it and gave it to Park Rec, which they use for the Christmas lights and other banner displays, and meets the qualifications. It was no good to be up near power lines, but it was good to do the safety work that they are implied. Maybe, Mr. Cummings, I'd be willing to work with you to see if the replacement, I imagine BPW needs the first line piece.
That's right.
But if this one that we're replacing has a wee bit of life left to it, maybe we can work something in-house as a direct transfer over to your division there.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Director Photo has been very gracious in that type of thinking in the past. You know, obviously, when you do something like that, you don't necessarily get to have the trade-in value, which helps reduce costs on that upfront purchase. That's, you know, but that's definitely a strategy that we should definitely look at.
Any other questions on parking? Alderman Jettie?
Yes, thank you. So, in that regard, could you explain what sidewalks are we talking about as far as parking enforcement and DPW? What's the dividing line?
So, Mr. Chairman, what I would recommend you do is you can go on the parking's website, and there's like a snow map that kind of delineates the routes that parking takes care of from a sidewalk removal perspective. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's pretty much, you know, where there's quote-unquote paid parking is the areas that, you know, parking takes care of from a sidewalk perspective. We have talked about just this year extending that down further, though we need to have additional conversations with DPW to ensure we can do it to their satisfaction. But it would try to get it down to Lake Street or thereabouts, because we recognize the Elm Street Middle School's needs. And so we're not ready yet to commit to doing that additional expansion until DPW signs off on it, but that is what we're talking about offering. And again, that would be the increase or the addition to what we currently maintain. And obviously what we currently maintain, what we're committing to doing is getting it done quicker.
Again, that discussion is going to come up during DPW. There's a whole thing on sidewalks. Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so when you say, you know, where there's paid parking, so the downtown sidewalks, we remove the snow and ice from those sidewalks? The parking enforcement?
That would be what would be traditionally considered under the parking's purview for removal, vis-a-vis the DPW.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for parking?
May I make just a couple last comments, Mr. Chairman? I know you'd like to move on, but it's really important that I
Yes.
just get this on the record, because this is the first year that we've changed how we fund the Downtown Improvement Committee, and I just want to make sure it's noted for the record. So we previously used to take an excess of something like $728,000 of parking revenues, and we would transfer that down to the Downtown Improvement Committee, and through separate legislative action, that is not occurring anymore. And so that's neither here nor there, but I know it had always been, you know, an integral element to how the parking operations kind of worked. And so we're moving away from that. And so therefore that is not occurring anymore. But nonetheless, the parking revenues are coming in, and, you know, we had kept it, you know, kind of low, static at that 728 figure. Now moving forward, when we have revenues and expenditures, if we do go to that enterprise system, you know, you're gonna see that revenue number maybe changing. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. So I remember that we decided to level fund the Downtown Improvements Committee. Just a question here, but if we have an excess of what we've been putting away, could that be a potential place for the deferred maintenance to come in?
Director Cummings.
Yeah, thank you. So, not to get too into the weeds here, so, to answer your question at a very high level, the answer is yes, though you shouldn't necessarily think of parking operations money for that. You should think of parking enforcement money. So parking enforcement money, I'll give you an example. So, we're projecting 350,000 in parking enforcement revenues. I'm gonna suggest, it's gonna be more like, 450-ish, in that range. And so that extra money, that extra $100,000-ish, gets transferred into a trust fund dedicated to parking maintenance.
All set?
I'm all set, thank you.
No other questions? We'll move into Nashua Riverwalk TIF District.
What page are we going to for that?
That is on page
233.
233.
233, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, interesting. So 233 shows the Riverwalk TIF, which is what is funding our downtown Riverwalk project. No real changes here per se. It is pretty stable. We will be I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking at something here. So you're saying page 233?
3.
That's the debt service.
So this is the debt service, and so relative to the debt service, this is actually something that was done a couple of years ago. No. I thought that this was going to be the debt service to the initial TIF district when it was created back in 2003, but I don't believe that what I was about to say is going to be accurate. So yes, this is what I was going to speak to for a sec. This is what I was about to speak to. Thank you, Alderman Karen. But page 233 is relative to the debt service that we have on hand for the TIF district. We started that project again in earnest back in like 2003, 2004. I believe that this is just the remaining debt that's left on that bond, that 20-year bond, which we are going to be paying off relatively soon. I thought it was getting paid off sometime around 2023, 2024, but it is maybe more like 2026, and I wasn't realizing it. So that is the Riverwalk that exists in front of Jackson Falls. The more robust TIF district that I typically talk about, and you've heard the most about over the last few years, is the expansion that is occurring from Jackson Falls or towards Cotton Mill and Clock Tower, back on up to Main Street, and then from Main Street back on over to BAE. And so Amy DeRoche has worked really hard over the last year to get the project completely designed. We have a $21 million bond authorization that we actually haven't started using the debt on that. We've been using cash that has come in from the TIF revenue that has been collected from the tax increment financing district. We anticipate actually needing to issue debt, probably not this fall, but next fall, because we will be going under construction probably this summer. I say probably, but Amy DeRoche is committed to me that we'll be going under construction this summer. And we're going to be tackling some of the projects that would be on the east side of the river. Specifically, we really need to get the pedestrian bridge that connects Clock Tower and Cotton Mill with an ADA compliant ramp. And that's for our first project that we're gonna be doing. We'll be anticipating taking that project under construction this summer. It's a $1 million project, so that would be 1 million out of the 20 million that we have authorized. We did receive some federal assistance with that through a legislatively directed a grant, and that will help offset that, approximate $1 million. We'll be looking to take on a mid-block crossing that I know is near and dear to Alderwoman Kelly, and that will be over by Clock Tower, and so we'll be looking to take that on this summer as well. We'll be looking to do a cantilever bridge, a cantilever riverwalk off of the Main Street Bridge, where the new barbecue restaurant is, and that will happen again in this summer type time frame. And so those are the major expenditures that will be occurring starting this summer. Most of those projects will, be contained within this construction season. Some may go over into next spring, so that would be spring of '24. Those monies we will use cash to pay up front, but we already have the authorized debt. And so then what you will start to see is some of this riverfront TIF district revenues being budgeted and categorized as debt service and going to pay the general obligation bond that has been issued to execute on these projects. So anyway, that's a quick update on the riverfront TIF district.
Any questions? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just an overall understanding of a TIF. I always read up on it every year and then I forget it, and then budget season comes and then I go, oh yeah, the TIF. Essentially, you take all the property in a designated area and then all of the tax revenue that's generated out of it. So I'm just going to use round, simple numbers. So let's say last year we established the TIF and that area generated $100 in revenue. This year, now that the TIF is there, it generated $150 in property value or property tax revenue. The $100 goes into the general fund. The $50, which is the incremental, goes into that fund and pays for development of that area. So I got it.
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
It's a very simplified version, but
That's
you
how
got
I
it.
roll.
Yep.
That's how I roll.
Yep.
Okay, that was my only question. Just wanted to make sure I was good.
Alderman Jettie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does anybody know these things that were put on our desk tonight, labeled Nashua Riverwalk TIF District and School Street TIF District, does anybody know where they go into this book? It's punched for holes and we've got a loose leaf binder, so.
Yeah, I got them too, but,
The one on this side.
doesn't have page numbers, so
Yeah, I have one too. Oh, you do?
I get extra copies up here too.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, Mr. Chairman, one, I don't think this side has that. Two, I believe, Alderwoman Karen just went to go make some copies. And I don't know, but I can find out for you where it necessarily goes in this budget layout. What I believe that is just the budget, if you will, for the TIF, and is the program that I just basically, talked to you about in narrative form.
Right.
So in the interim, you have some of the tabs that don't have anything in them. For the time being, I put it in one of those tabs.
And so let's just note that I did that all from memory.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Well, in that question, I have a few questions about the details.
Alderman Jettie, you follow up?
No, thank you.
Oh, no,
I was
okay.
just joking.
Alderwoman Kelly?
I want to try to keep my questions to the budget, so I wanted to know if the board will be getting an update before the construction starts on the Riverwalk.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
We actually already gave a great update like that to the infrastructure committee, I want to say 6 weeks ago. The infrastructure committee, John Van Cor, Hannah Swanson came before the infrastructure committee and gave an update along with the TIF committee itself. Around the same time, all this should be up on the website, where he gave, again, a project status update. If you'd like, and I'd be happy to seek him to come back again and give an additional
You
update.
have it.
I'm happy to look at the infrastructure, we hadn't heard it as a full board in a while, so I'm excited to have the work start, for sure, and I think it's gonna be a great
It was on my
improvement to
desk.
downtown. I do have one question I'm gonna ask you right now, because it was just on my mind. So the improvement to the pedestrian, is it only on the one side, on the Cotton Mill side? Because I believe there is a ramp on the other side, right?
Correct, it's just on the, if I may, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman,
so you can
again.
go and then
Yes.
you have to go back. Yeah. Okay,
And-
or
and-
through the building. Yeah.
And that is the exact issue, Mr. Chairman, Tim Cummings, for the record, to answer Alderwoman Kelly's question. The ADA ramp is going to be a ramp from the Cotton Mill side of the riverbank, because there is one currently on the clock tower side, and that is what's gonna bring us into ADA compliance.
Great,
All set?
yes.
Any other questions on the Riverside, Tim? No, then we'll move on to the School Street TIF.
So the School Street TIF, again, a very straightforward project. This is a project that we're using the future increment captured off of the School Street apartments, if you will, for two main purposes. One, to help support the Performing Arts Center that was paid for through TIF funds. But then the other major element is actually the parking structure that is getting built underneath the apartments. And so that's the only two uses of the funds that was committed to the Board of Aldermen at the time. Until I'm directed otherwise, we would only be using these revenues for these purposes specifically. So it's really just now paying debt service for bonds that have been issued. And there has been no change in the business plan since the last time we met.
So, did we not discuss at some point in time when we changed the direction of Pearl Street to use some of the TIF funds for the enhancements to the street, the sidewalk, the trees, the benches,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, again, Tim Cummings for the record, that is an eligible cost, and it could be, and the funds could be used for that if so directed. And I want to be clear about that. It is an eligible cost. We have not used these funds for that. It absolutely would be a legally allowed use of these funds. And I say this because I know TIFs are sensitive. And so I always want to stay very true to what has been previously represented. And so I had only previously represented that we would use the TIF for the two specific itemized expenditures I previously spoke about. But of course, any future body could use the monies however they would like. So if that's something that I should start to look at for the West Pearl Street streetscaping, we can absolutely do that. We are seeing some excess funds in the account. I don't know the dollar amount off the top of my head. I don't know if it would be enough to make a substantial difference to a West Pearl Street streetscaping project. I would have to do the analysis on that. But there is some quote-unquote leftover monies, and the intention has always been to transfer those monies back to the general fund. So that, again, I'm just outlining what the plan had been previously. If Mr. Chairman, you or the infrastructure chair wanted to have a more robust conversation at a subcommittee about potentially using this as a funding source, I would welcome that conversation.
I don't think we're anywhere near ready to embrace that. That was just for the future.
Yes, it is an option for the future.
Any other questions? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the revenue side of the School Street TIF, I want to make sure that I understand it. In fiscal year '23, current fiscal year, we budgeted 0 for property taxes. Should I assume that that 0 means incremental property tax over and above what was generated in prior years? Okay. Where can I find the fund balance total for the School Street TIF? Where is that located? Is that in expendable trust funds?
Director Cummings?
I would have to double check exactly where it would be. I don't believe it would be an expendable trust fund, but it would be a segregated account. And I say that too because I know, it's not a trust fund, but it would be a segregated account. I know I know the revenues going in would be shown in the MS1. But I don't think, to your question about what is basically the balance in that account, which is, I think, the question at hand, I can find out for you where that would be shown.
Okay, I appreciate it.
I believe that John Griffin watches all of these meetings and usually talks to me the next day about the questions that came up with and answers, so I'm sure he can provide us with that answer.
Mr. Griffin, if you're out there. Can I have a
Not
follow-up?
on Zoom, he just wanted.
Okay, can I have a follow-up,
Yes,
please?
follow-up?
And this is just City 101 question mark. The School Street apartments that are getting built, obviously no one lives in them yet. When do they start generating tax revenue? When people live in them? No, now.
No.
Now, so it's called,
Building.
you capture partial taxes. You don't get the full freight, if you will, until they're occupied.
Right.
But you capture every April 1st, whatever you're supposed to be at that point in time. So it's a percentage, if you will. So in people who are into this stuff like TIFs, really a big thing that happens is when concrete steel goes in. So when steel goes up, that is usually a way of delineating a certain percentage of assessment.
Okay.
And that it would be, again, a partial assessment until you get your occupancy. And then you'd be, and again, if you get your full occupancy after April 1st, you have to wait for the following April 1st to change the assessment, but that's what typically occurs. So we are getting, a good share right now because that occupancy is probably scheduled for this fall of 23, and that would be reflected in April 1st of 2024. We'll start seeing the full freight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the last I knew, they were going to be fully completed by no later than October.
Yeah, that's my understanding, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions on the School Street TIF? Seeing none, I think we already covered the Hunt Building Facility Rental Fund.
We did.
So unless there are any other questions in the general government area, we will move on to the library. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
And the library is on 152.
Next time I follow Director Cummings, I'm gonna bring a cushion.
Okay, want to introduce yourselves and give us an overview of the library, and then we'll get into the budget.
Okay, Linda LaFlamme, I am the chairman of the Library Board of Trustees.
And I'm Jen McCormack, the director at the library. Thank you for having us here.
Yeah, before we dive into the budget, which Jen and her staff once again did an excellent job on, I just want to say how heartening it was to hear all of you talk about how important it is when you build a new building, you take care of it and you support it in the future when it needs some help. Because believe it or not, the new library, our building, is over 50 years old now. And as you may remember from the facilities study that we presented to you earlier this year, we too have issues with water coming in and brickwork and windows and boilers. I mean, it was deja vu listening to the Hunt building. So I know it's what we're not here to talk about today, but I hope when it comes time, and we do come to you looking for some teamwork on funding what we need to do to the grand old girl, that you're as optimistic and as willing to support our infrastructure as you seem to be today. So, great. And now you can talk about numbers.
So I brought some updated statistics tonight. I think you had some in your budget narrative. We are also, similar to Amy in the Hunt building, experiencing a great rebound in library business since the COVID closure and easing back in. As of the end of the third quarter of fiscal year 2023, we've had 261,000 items had been circulated. 70,000 of those are digital items, which is interesting. And we have had at that point, nearly 129,000 visits to the library. That's just in the first 3 quarters of the year. So we are still a really vital and important part of the city, not just for the downtown folks, but families all over the city. Our meeting rooms are back to pre-COVID levels. We actually have 49 different community groups using our meeting rooms on a regular basis, either monthly, weekly, or some other iteration of that. And our study rooms are also booked nearly all the time. It's a really exciting time for us, and I think it speaks to our value to the people who live in Nashua. This year, the mayor requested that we stick within a 3% increase in our budget, which I was able to do. We were able to do. Sorry, taking credit for the board's work. I was able to meet that goal while still incorporating a contingency amount for union negotiations that we are currently in, and maintaining the same level of service that the library currently provides with no reduction in staffing or hours. In fact, the budget, as we're proposing, would keep us open on Sundays year-round. And if our negotiations are successful, we'll return to 4 hours of service on Sundays instead of 3. However, if you look at our budget, it looks a little bit different than it has in past years. We made some changes to budget lines really to help me and my team track more closely what we're spending on services to customers and what we're spending on services, staff support, and our kind of in-house expenses. We also cleaned up some terms that are really no longer relevant. So what used to be technology operations, we split out. So what you see is technology operations. Those are the expenses related to the library's network and internet access. Really staff side technology expenses. We moved the licensing fees for applications and services that we use for customers to the software licenses line. So that line pays for things like our integrated library system, which manages our database and all of our transactions, our online calendar, the software for our self-check stations, our new website. The library is actually moving to Civic Plus, so we'll be on the same platform as the city. But what has been publications in the past, we are now calling books because that's what we use it for, and that would be physical books. This is really tiny. The postage meter lease, we broke out of the postage line so we can more closely track what we spend on postage. In postage, that cost is how we supply our books by mail service. So we currently have 65 customers who are homebound who get books by mail, and then you mail them back to us. We have bright red mailing envelopes, kind of like the red Netflix envelopes that are gone now.
Nostalgia there.
Yeah, and we have seen, postage goes up like everything else does, and we have more clients than in the past, so we've grown that program a bit. We used to have a whole bunch of things thrown into what's labeled miscellaneous supplies. We've divided that up a little bit to make more sense for us. So we're leaving the label miscellaneous supplies, but that's really being used for processing supplies. So that amount is paying for labels, book covers, DVD cases, things that the staff use for material processing. Inventory supplies, that's money we spend on items that customers use, like library cards, materials for our maker spaces, crayons and paper for the kids' room, that kind of thing. Printing supplies we'll use, that will pay for paper for staff and customer printing. We're moving to a new public printing vendor, so they will no longer supply paper, so we needed to add some money in for that. We added a marketing and outreach line that lets us more closely track what we spend on software that we use for graphics production and our newsletters, promotional supplies, and any equipment we use for outreach events. We added a line for printing services. We are not always able to use the city's printing department. We frequently have larger scale jobs or require folding, or we have deadlines that department can't meet. We've added a line for translation services. We've been translating things and paying for that out of miscellaneous supplies for reasons I can't describe. But we would like to demonstrate a commitment to that and be able to track how those expenses roll out over the year. And we've created another kind of messy budget line called Other Collections. We are working on establishing a library of things, so you may have heard of that in other communities. It's really a collection of tangible items that are fairly expensive or difficult to procure that you might only use once or twice a year. So you may not want to purchase one for your house or for your family, but you'd like to have it to use and share throughout the community. Before I sat at this Oval, I would have been able to give you a million examples, but right now the only one that comes to mind is cake pans. So the Hooksett Public Library has a big collection of cake pans for themed birthday parties. So that kind of thing. Gardening implements are another idea. We're working on establishing a makerspace for adults that will have video editing software. So the Library of Things, we will also loan a camera that you'd be able to use, so you could take the camera, record the video, come in, and then use our software to edit it. We did make reductions in a few lines on the operating side. We reduced the books and media budget. Those are paid for physical items, and circulation of those are decreasing. We reduced our expenses on subscriptions, which are really our databases. We reduced our expenses on periodicals. Those are magazines, and those are really by attrition disappearing. And we made some small reductions in our dues and memberships line, mostly because that line pays for, one of the things it pays for are our museum passes, and the Friends of the Library now pay for all of those now. Because of those reductions, there's some new services we're adopting over the next few months, most of which I've already mentioned. We have new public printing and computer time management software, which has been slower to roll out than we'd like, but it's coming. New online calendar, which also incorporates scheduling software for staff, and that will roll out starting, we're already using the staff scheduling side, but the public meeting room booking and calendar piece will roll out on Monday. We're developing a library of things and establishing a makerspace for adult customers. We have one for teens already and for kids. We did increase a few lines to reflect either actual spending or a shift in priorities. Program expenses, we've increased a little bit. We're finding that, like everything else, it has become more expensive. Performers are requiring a little bit more expense. We increased our electricity line, and that's not because our rate has gone up. Thanks to Doria, we have this really great rate until I think a year from November, but our electricity use is increasing as the building gets more leaky. So we have staff working in alcoves or next to windows that are leaking. The brick is not, it's an old building. So we've actually run out of electricity money this year, and we're borrowing it from somewhere else. And we did increase postage just because that price went up. So that's a lot to absorb. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the library? Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. And first a comment. One of you said being over 50 was new, and the other one said being over 50 was old. So I'm going to go with the new comment since I am over 50 and considered new. But that aside, I noticed overall, and I appreciate that your budget was more or less level with the previous year, so I do appreciate that. So I'm assuming that when I look at the line for software licensing, which is a jump of 97,000, you did speak to, you created some new lines. I'm assuming
Correct,
that's a
yes.
new line.
Right.
Can you just talk a little bit more about what that software licensing is? Is that the jump from the current web platform to the new web platform?
So that's really just an accounting change. So that whole amount, technology operations used to incorporate that $97,000 plus the 13 that's still in there.
Okay,
So included in there is the new website platform. That
Yes.
expense is in the vicinity of $9,000.
Okay.
But that's really essentially breaking out customer-facing software and not technology, the technology we use for operations.
sure, okay. Thank you, thanks.
Other questions? Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. I always love when you guys come in. One of my favorite departments. I actually had a couple of comments and then a question. So comment number one was just, I was very appreciative of the fact that a couple of the changes you made in the budget are very thoughtful of the types of diverse communities we have, so the transition services and tracking that. I'm really interested to see what happens there. You have it under your highlights and accomplishments, but I was championing getting rid of all of the fines. I really think that was an important piece to making sure everybody has equal use to the library. So I wanted to just say thank you for that. My questions. My question number one was around moving the website over. Is there efficiencies to moving it over? Because your website now seems great, but I'm not using it every day.
Alderwoman Kelly, you may be the only person who thinks our website is great. There is definitely efficiencies because the website as it's hosted now is maintained entirely by our IT coordinator on top of his full-time duties. And he's not a web designer or an information architect. So Civics Plus offers this 24-hour support and updates regularly. Weston's very happy.
They also are very well known in the industry and do so many, so I understand that they will be a good support for you. I also wanted to ask.
Alderwoman Kelly, can you just pull your mic a little
Oh,
closer?
sorry. I can also just speak a little louder. Sorry about that. You were talking about the Library of Things. Now, this isn't budget related, but I'm really excited about it, but also wanted to know if you were looking for crowdsourcing donations, so people have things that they've purchased once and want to help.
That will definitely be part of our plan, but I would say to anyone
Don't just start
who's
dropping.
watching is please don't start showing up with it. So,
That's not what I was looking at.
yes, so we're still designing it, but absolutely that will be part of it. And I think that will, similar to our seed library, that Library of Things will be a community-driven project. We want to know what the community wants. If they have items to share that Risk will let us loan out. Yeah, so absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Jettie?
Thank you. Yeah, I think a chainsaw would be nice to be able.
Jen DeShays is rolling over now.
So I know that, I think that the library has waived fines.
Yes,
So how's that working out?
it's working out fabulously. I have had 2 negative comments from people more advanced in age than anybody in this room that don't understand it. But universally from families and individuals, we've just heard appreciation for it. People telling us that they're more willing to come to the library, they're letting their kids borrow more items. Some people say, whether it's true or not, that they're working harder to get them back on time just because they're feeling so good about us. You may be asking for data, and I maybe am being facetious. I don't have great data for you on that tonight, Alderman Jettie.
I'm just, wondering, if I'm on the list of, if I'm looking for a book and it's out, and I'm on the waiting list, and there's no incentive for that person who has the book to bring it back, how does that?
Well, there is an incentive, because if they keep it too long, then they can't use their library card anymore. So they would, in fact, after something is overdue for a long enough period of time, you are billed for that item and you're no longer able to use your library card. So that's the primary motivator.
Okay.
We also internally have a threshold we reach, so when more than 5 or 6 people are waiting for a book, we buy another copy. So that's another way that we can relieve that.
Okay. And I noticed publications went from 98,000 to 0. Books went from 0 to 90,000.
Yep.
Is that-
Yep, so we just are renaming publications to books, because that's what it really is.
Okay. And, this new policy of not charging fines, so you're not finding that people are just keeping the book and
No,
you're not losing books?
no, we are not. We are
Okay,
not.
well, that's good. Now, I notice that in the library has funds that people have donated over the years, and some are restricted, some are non-restricted, but
Right.
basically, it looks like there's, well over $1 million there in those funds. And are you using those? Can any of those be used for, to help you maintain the building, or, what's the story on that money?
Well, as a matter of fact, we used a very large chunk of those funds recently to fund our facilities study, or to jointly fund our facilities study. The amount of work that needs to be done would empty out all of those funds, and we'd still owe money. So we are trying to use them. We've actually got some creative ideas for the Burbank, which is devoted to living artists, for using that coming up shortly. But many of them do also have restrictions. I mean, if we can find a Lithuanian builder, then we could put the Zalonis fund towards it, because it is for Lithuanian-related expenses. Thanks to Mr. Zalonis. But we are, as a board of trustees, we are always looking at those funds and always thinking of the balance between the city's contribution and what those funds could help us with.
Because I would just hate to think that the money is just sitting there, gaining interest maybe, but, it ought to be used, for whatever purpose the donor intended. We ought to use it. We shouldn't just be sitting there, in my opinion. Okay, thank you.
All set? Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm probably at the library at least once a week, sometimes more. Probably have 4 or 5 books out right now. When did the fines stop? And I say that because, so there was no revenue at all on fines. You stopped it before the year started. Is that accurate?
Yeah, fine revenue actually never showed up in the budget book, so that goes into its own special revenue fund that's governed by statute.
Okay, follow-up?
Follow-up?
So you said some of the things by just attrition, because, publications are going away, newspapers
Right.
going away. And I agree with Alderwoman Kelly. I love the website. I use Canopy, Hoopla, Libby. I use historical newspapers, the Union Leader. You can go on there and read every day for free. So I think it's great. I always get nervous that it's going to get worse if you go somewhere else. But one thing I've noticed recently when I've gone into the library is the amount of books not on the shelves. Like, there is big gaps on the shelving now, and I'm like, wow, they've gotten rid of a lot of books. The CD collection is down to like basically 1 row. You guys are giving them away for free. Are you cutting back on things that people can take out, other than the fact that you're gonna have these other items and things that you guys are working on? Our books, are you slowly starting to pare down the books at the library, or?
That's a hard question to answer. Yes, we are discarding plenty of books. I always say we don't have the incredible telescoping library, so that's part of the work we have to do. Books that are chosen for deselection or weeding are ones that haven't gone out for a certain number of years, and depending on what Dewey number in the nonfiction collection, so there's different recommendations. Books about history will keep a long time. Books on medicine, if they've been published more than 7 or 10 years ago, then we'll get rid of them because they've been replaced. I think part of the phenomenon you might be seeing is we have people going through the collection and removing shelves of them to relabel them and then putting them back. So I suspect that's what you're seeing.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking that, I'm thinking about when I was a kid and you research stuff. Now you don't research stuff in the
No.
library, so.
Well, you can.
But,
Yeah.
you can, but people don't, so. But I appreciate what you guys do. Like I said, I love using your services, and my kids use them, and, I'll continue to use it as long as you guys are there, so thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the library? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you. So that reminded me of something I may have asked this last year, I'm not sure. But you've got, some, a collection of historical books that are very valuable for people doing research there. Is there any possibility of copying those to some digital media that would make them more available to people?
There absolutely is. So we have, I think, 3 volumes actually available online. I'm not sure that all 3 are there. But the kind of project that you're talking about would be hugely valuable to the library, to the community at large. And if Pamela Davies is watching these, I think she would be great to work with for some grant funding. The hunt room itself, where those materials reside, needs to be completely remodeled. We have books on shelves, wood shelves, that they should not be on that. They're exposed to sunlight, which they should not be. We have insects in that room. We have moisture coming in the windows, so it's more than, I think digitizing those materials would be incredibly important, but I think that should be part of a bigger look at that whole collection and how we house them and how we're able to provide access.
That would be a good use of the funds that you've got sitting.
Yes, so I know, I didn't come prepared to talk about all of that, but the biggest fund that the trustees administer, the Stearns Fund, is limited to reading material not normally purchased by the city of Nashua. So we spend $150,000 a year out of that on things like digitizing the Telegraph, because we consider that reading material, or content for Libby, because ebooks are reading material. But to live within the stipulations of that trust and spend, there may be $2 million invested. That's, I don't know how we're going to do that,
Yeah.
Chairwoman Laflamme.
Part of, one issue, if I may, that kind of weaves through a lot of this, the fines and it's not seeing as many things on the shelves, and how do we handle something like the Stearns Fund, is just the way the world of publications and videos is changing right now. Because a lot of the fines income that we would have when my early days on the board was from people checking out DVDs. Because that's how you watch movies back then. You got a DVD and you put it in your player, or you put your VHS tape in your player, and that's what you did. Now, you pop on whatever streaming service you happen to have, and that's how people are getting the movies. And they're not getting checked out as much, they're not getting kept as, so it's all interrelated. And likewise, we're using Stearns now for things like digitizing the reading materials to get it in a different format, and we're using it for the ebooks because that is reading material. But to fix the wood shelving in the hunt room, we couldn't do because bookshelves aren't reading material. And I actually remember having discussion like that many years ago. Well, could we buy new shelves with that? No. So it's a difficult problem sometimes to meet all of the restrictions and still pay the bills.
Additional questions?
Yeah,
Follow
just
up?
to follow, I believe some of the funds are unrestricted.
Yes, that is true.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
You.
And Alderman O'Brien, do we have a motion?
Yes, thank you,
Not to
Mr. Chair.
adjourn.
I was gonna do it again for you. Would like to make the correct motion to table R-23-125, which is the budget.
Motion on the floor is to table the budget till the next budget meeting, R-23-125. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. General discussion? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so, have you been able to determine the date for the public hearing?
20th. Donna put out an email today,
Oh, she did? Do you remember what it said?
20th.
20th, okay, thank you.
7 o'clock, same place. And I believe, if I remember it right, we'll have one wrap up the 21st, and then the budget will be adopted the 27th, I think is the Tuesday, next Tuesday. Last Tuesday of June. Goes to the full board. All right. And there's no public, so there's no public comment. Remarks by Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just found it very interesting that Director Cummings did get into mentioning the infrastructure and lack of repair. And I hope, I know when I'm preaching to the choir, but to some of the newer aldermen that haven't been here, this is my second term, these problems don't go away. They'll manifest and they'll get worse. And we just heard from the library folks. I mean, one of the issues is I would not build a library today that the way this place was, built. At the time, it was architecturally pleasing in the 70s, but it does nothing for efficiencies or anything else like that. So in order to upgrade it means that how do you insulate a standalone brick wall, So these are complex issues. It's going to take time. It took a lot for us to get here, but it'll get worse. And again, I don't mean to preach to the choir, but I would like to make sure that it does stay within our tip of our tongues as we move on in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, any other? Alderman Tebow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Director Cummings and his staff for coming in tonight, and the library staff as well coming in, because, again, like I said the other night, they're taking time out of their day to spend a longer day with us here, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like now to make the motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We adjourn at 8:49 PM.